we're holding there for participants. So I'm going to just kick it off here, and then hopefully some other people join as we go. So good morning and welcome. We're going to wait. Well, never mind. We've already waited a little bit, but welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Chris Mann. I am the sponsorship specialist here at the Halifax Chamber of Commerce. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the tragic events from this past weekend. This has been a difficult time for Nova Scotians. We are grateful to our first responders and are thinking of everyone affected. We continue to send virtual hugs to everyone around the province, especially this week. So we appreciate you joining us today, and I am so pleased to welcome you to our Navigating COVID-19 webinar, Shaping a Thriving Remote Working Environment. Our guest, Michael Deviney from Work Insights. Michael has worked closely with entrepreneurs and leaders seeking growth since 2003. In 2017, Michael founded Work Insights to develop a business analytic tool to understand working environment and the capacity for innovation, growth, and wellness. Today, Mike will be speaking about how we can proactively shape the way we work, distance from each other. We will have time to answer questions at the end, so feel free to ask questions. Also, Michael will be asking questions during his presentation, so be sure to raise your hand during that time and we'll unmute your mic. And feel free to also leave comments in the chat box. A reminder that when we are using the chat box, there is an option to address your message to panelists, which we will only see by myself and Michael, or to panelists and all attendees, which everyone will be able to see. So let's get started. Michael, thank you so much for joining us, and I will pass it over to you.
Thanks very much, Chris. I appreciate people taking time this morning to come to the webinar. And it's a sunny day in a very, I guess, sad and surreal world. And this is a chance for us to distract a little bit and see what's going on with ourselves and how we're working today. I told Chris I just noticed outside my window, which is one of the great things about working at home, is one of my neighbors actually dancing up the sidewalk. So she's clearly enjoying working remotely and getting a lot out of it. I'm not sure that everyone else is with that, but she's enjoying the way that she's working right now. For the session, we're really looking at what's going on right now, but also how do we find the opportunity? So much of what's happening has been thrust upon us. We've had no choice. We've had to make these moves. And it has also shown how adaptable we can be, how innovative we can be. And in there is an opportunity for what we can take forward. We've learned things in the last month, 6 weeks, and sadly, probably in the next number of weeks that we'll be home, that there's different ways to work. My background is that I worked for years as an investment analyst, and then I went into strategy consulting, organizational performance. And one thing that always fascinated me is why people do what they do, how they work, why people are different in some settings than others. And that really played into me as to what was going on. For me, it's also become very personal. 4 years ago, I went through a very serious bout with depression, which at that time I came out of both of the businesses I had and really questioned myself. And as an analyst, I had to find answers. So I founded the Mindset Project, which looked at how entrepreneurs deal with decision-making and mental health. And what I found, of course, is I'm not alone, that all of us face different challenges, and for some, they can be quite overwhelming. What it also led to was an understanding of the working environment. We focus so much on the individual, so that part of the organization. And what we miss is the interaction of people in terms of how the way we actually work together is what really tells how the business is going to work and how we're going to do. So I started to understand working environment. So a working environment is the experience we have in terms of the work that we do and the dynamics of that work and what it's like and how that plays out on us. So you can be exceptional in one working environment and then oddly enough go to another place and find that you simply aren't the same person. And that's where we need to look at working environment. And now more than ever, because we're working remotely, we have to look at that working environment and see how it's impacting people. So as we go forward, what we're going to do is talk about the opportunity. So on the next slide, we start looking at the opportunity that we have. And again, we can get caught up in where we are today, or we can start looking at how can we take this and move it forward. Only about 23% of small businesses invest in research and development for innovation pre-COVID. Now we've had to innovate at both speed and scale, which, to be honest, I think is a great thing. We've had to make moves that we never would have made before. If you had asked me 8 weeks ago, would I work remotely and have my team work remotely, I have to be honest and say that I would have said no. But what I've found is that this has been the greatest thing ever. Part of it is that I'm an introvert, so being on my own, working at home, that's okay. It does affect extroverts, I think, more in terms of that social connection. But I have to admit, there's a part that really loves this, and also a part that's looking for other things. So what we have to do right now is look at what's actually working and what can we take forward. So if we go to the next slide, what we're seeing is where we are today. So a recent study that was just released last week shows that we've gone from 26% of the workforce being remote to 72% of the workforce now working remotely. And so productivity's gone up by about 25%. I think we have to be careful on the productivity numbers, because right now we're all sharing an experience that brings a sense of common cause and then solidarity. So that, I think, probably has made us work a bit harder and put more into our work. And I also think sometimes we want to get distracted from the people that are around us at home, so we do work a bit longer. So I'd be watchful of the productivity numbers in terms of where we're going. But when we look at that, people have responded very positively to working remotely. So the questions start becoming, what's happening? Are we doing okay? Or are we losing ground? Or are we moving ahead? So what we look at in the next slide is that we needed to change. We weren't given a choice, but we really had to make a change. And there's a great quote from McKinsey that says, done right, remote work can boost productivity and morale. So it can be a very positive thing. Done badly, it can breed inefficiencies, damage work relationships, and actually demotivate people from what they're trying to do. So much of what remote work will be is about how we actually set it up, and do we set people up for success. So that's what we're going to talk about. On the next page, what does success look like? So for employees, being at home, the challenge could be that you feel isolated. You feel disconnected from your team. There's added pressures of caring for children. I've heard from all kinds of people that have young children versus teenagers, that the different issues they face. And this can lead to a lot of insecurities and fears. So being at home can be a challenge for people on the employee side. For managers, there's this belief that if I can't see you, I can't control what's going on. And managers focus so much on the process and the oversight of that process. When people are physically removed, it's really hard to see that. And they're not being able to manage performance effectively. So they think, but I think there's a really great opportunity in the fact that they can't see you all the time. So if we go to the next slide, we look at what is the actual opportunity. So we look at is what's happened more than anything else is our ability to adapt and to be resilient, and to show how we are much stronger individually, both as companies and organizations. This remote work environment has given us a chance to look at the freedom and flexibility. I think more than anything else, what I've seen is it slowed down the pace of life, that before we just felt this pressure to be places at certain times, and we had to be there. And we put so much pressure on ourselves to live up to what we thought everybody expected of us. Now that we're home and we're working in this new environment, I think the pace has slowed down. And I think overall that's been a positive. And that's something that's made a real difference. Going forward, can we take that with us? Can we take a different approach to work in the sense of being more relaxed and more respectful of our own health and well-being at home, as well as being productive and creative at work? And I think that will be the real opportunity that we're looking for. So how do we do that? So going forward, we look at, can we embrace this as a path to increase productivity and overall well-being? Can we actually understand where each other is and make more thoughtful and informed decisions? And does this open up a whole new way that we can work that's going to benefit both businesses and people themselves? So then it comes down to what is a thriving remote work environment. So what are the different things that make that? And I thought what would be good is to just open up for some questions. On the next page, there's a question that says, what has surprised you the most from working at home? And one of the best things we can do is actually share our experiences. So if anyone's brave enough, if you want to raise your hand and just comment on terms of what's been the biggest surprise you've had from working at home. For me, I'll start. The biggest surprise is how relaxing it has been and how productive I'm working with my own team. It's just been an incredible experience, very positive. What have other people found?
So this is an opportunity. If you want, you can raise your hand. Michael, oh, we do have one attendee, a couple of attendees raising hands there. So Paul, would you like to go first?
Sure. I've been working remotely from home for a number of years now. I think a couple of the big savings is in terms of time, like you don't have the daily commute and the stress. I'm happy to avoid that and doing the hunting for parking, but it also reduces a lot of the interruptions that might happen and allows you to control your work environment to a much greater degree than if you're sitting in a cubicle somewhere and having to listen to all the other phone calls and conversations that are going on around you as well. And so, especially if you can get your own separate workspace, like a room set aside as an office, as opposed to trying to do it in the kitchen counter, that's probably not going to help as much. But I think those help you. And also, it does, I found it gave me a lot of flexibility. Like, even though I was running a consulting business and my wife, you know, she's self-employed too, but having that flexibility to take time for the children if they need it or whatever, and spend some extra time in the evening or whatever. And you tended to work more towards deadlines and completions targets as opposed to, you know, just putting time in or what have you. So those are a couple thoughts.
Great, thanks, Paul. Just one more, maybe.
Oh, sorry, no, that was it.
Okay.
Michael.
I did hear something really funny from someone the other day. They said they're having, the biggest surprise has been how much fun they've had as a family, and it hasn't cost anything. On the other hand, he said, but we are spending a lot of time together as a family, and maybe that needs to change a bit. So there's real positives of being at home with people that you love, and then there's also trying to find your own space. So I think the biggest thing that I think has surprised people is the flexibility we have, and that ability to have both time and space to be able to work the way that we want to and live the way that we want to. So moving on, what we found is that a study done in 2020, which is on the next page, has shown that 98% of people who have worked remotely would like to stay remote. So they actually have enjoyed it so much that they want to keep it that way. And the 5-year growth rate in working remotely has grown by about 43%, and that was pre-COVID. So this is something that's really been building anyway. And the question is going to be, how much are we going to change going forward? And it's clear that employees value the option to work remotely. So then it's looking at how do we make that work in the best way possible. So on the next slide, there's another question, and going to a different way and just looking at what's made the most positive difference for you in working remotely from home. I saw someone in chat saying they just absolutely loved the experience. So that's something a lot of people have been saying. Anybody else want to raise their hand? Just let Chris know what's been the most positive difference for you.
We have a question or a raised hand from Kevin. Kevin, go ahead.
So the most positive thing for me has been the ability to set your own schedule.
Yes.
So, you know, you can, you know, you need to accomplish a task, but you're defining the time period in which that task, you're going to accomplish that. I mean, everybody has a deadline, but we're in a position right now where our deadlines are a little more fluid. But even I've been working remotely for about 10 years. I showed up at an office, put a tie on every day, put my suit coat on, and I showed up at 8 o'clock and I left at 5. And I did that. And then about 10 years ago, the company I worked for said, nope, you're working from home. That ability to do that and to set your own pace, set your own guidelines. If I want to accomplish something and I need to do it at 8 o'clock at night, as long as I'm meeting the deadline that's assigned to that I have the freedom and the ability to do that. So what it does is it for me personally, it removes a lot of the stresses for a deadline. I mean, you know, if there's something going on early in the morning, I have the ability to go get my hair cut at 9 o'clock in the morning if I want to, which God, I would love to do right now. But, but that's one of the, I guess for personally, that was a positive difference for me.
That's great. Thanks, Kevin. Any other question or comment someone wants to make?
There was just a comment from Louise or Lois, excuse me, who said, I work remotely and now it's the new normal. So I think that a lot of people that have worked remotely, you know, it's business as usual kind of thing, other than maybe going out for meetings.
Yeah, it's. I think we're all getting a taste of it and finding out how positive it can be. And I think more than anything else, what I've heard is the positive has been, that is what Kevin had said, that freedom to set schedule. And that's, I think, made the biggest difference for all of us. And that in itself actually raises the satisfaction with your work, because you're actually able to have some autonomy and set the way you work. And we get away from how something should be done, supposedly, versus the outcome. And what we're really interested in is the outcome. And now we can decide, and we are able to walk the dog at lunchtime. Sometimes a lot of people are saying what's been the most positive difference is actually giving themselves the ability to do things they wouldn't have done before and not feel guilty about it. So that if you're having a tough day, and some of us will face a day where it's just not a good day, you can give yourself that time and you can make it up at a different block in the week, and that makes a big difference too. So I think the positive difference that I've seen is that we're more focused on the outcome, less focused on how we're getting there. And I see people coming in with, the most rewarding jobs have been within flexible environments. And there's no question, the more flexible we are, the more we're going to get out of our work, and the more the company or business or organization will get from their employees overall. So I think that's probably one of the biggest learnings that we'll have from all of this. So moving on, what does done right look like? So what we look at now, done right, employers gain about a 13% productivity improvement, and that's pre-COVID. So that's been through assessments done in the past. And we also have reduced cost, of course, from office space and other expenses that go with that. So overall, financially, working remotely is a good move for employers. There's also the added benefit of engagement and greater attraction and attention of talent, because people want that flexibility. For employees done right, there's an automatic 8% financial improvement, simply because we're not paying for parking, we're not putting a lot into the cars, a lot of things change on that side. And of course, the biggest sense is that we have more freedom and we have a lot less stress. So that's done right. When we go forward, what does that look like? Companies have been looking and thinking about remote work for a number of years. Some have made the move, and as I said, there's been 43% growth in that. So some companies do well and it works out very positively. Others face challenges. So what we looked at are, what are the 5 pieces that actually make the biggest difference? So when we look at what will create an environment where you can thrive with remote work arrangements, this is what we've found. There has to be that sense of connection. Working from home right now, it is a bit different because we're all in this together type of thing. But if we go to this new normal that's coming up, or our next normal that's coming up, if we're working remotely, we have to keep that sense of connection. And connection is the fact that there's relationships there, that we know people at work. One of the greatest attributes of positive engagement is there's someone that we feel that we have a real personal connection with. So if we're working at home, there can be that challenge of not having it. So if we can establish ways that people can have a sense of connection with everyone else in the company, that makes a hugely positive difference. Effective communication is always an issue, but more so when people are working remotely. A lot of this comes down to getting the information you need, having access to the information, and more importantly, having access to supervisors and colleagues. A lot of times when you have an on-site, off-site working environment where there's people on both sides, meetings can happen in the office and they don't think to include people that are working remotely. So there has to be a really concerted effort to look at making sure there's inclusion as you go through your meetings and providing information for people, which of course moves to this whole cultural piece that it's all about inclusion. For people to feel they trust the business and trust the people they work with, they have to feel that they're actually a part of the organization. They have to be included, and that's socially as well as through work. A feeling of meaningful contribution, that's a part of everyone's ability to feel that they're doing something worthwhile. Is there accountability and recognition? Is there continued learning and growth? Are you included in terms of projects and promotions? So we really want to see that we're making a contribution that's being recognized. And the fifth one is that clarity of coordination, in the sense of, is there a compelling vision that draws me in? Are there clear lines of reporting? A lot of times, again, when people are working remotely, they get a bit lost in the structure of the organization. So there has to be really cohesive in terms of where people are. And there's coherent goals and activities and sharing of that progress. A lot of this, again, happens both in the on-site working environment, but most definitely when you're working remotely. So these are the 5 factors that will separate out whether a company does really well with remote working arrangements or flexible working arrangements, or if there's challenges with any of them, that's where we're going to face some problems. So going forward, what we're going to look at is what has been helpful and what is needed. So now people are finding that leaders, I think right now we're 6 weeks in. I think for the first probably 4 weeks, everyone was saying it's great. The last couple of weeks, things have started to change. We've got a lot of uncertainty, I think, more than any other time. And people are starting now to question, where are we going? What is that next normal going to look like? There's so many different models of what could happen, and we just don't know. So now we're looking more and more for the leaders, the business owners, the entrepreneurs to actually let us know that it's okay, that may not have all the answers, but here's what we're looking at and here's what might happen. So I'm interested in, again, if people want to raise their hand, what have leaders been doing for your business that has been helpful, or what would you like to see them doing that would be more helpful? So anybody have a comment on that?
So I don't see any hand up, but I will share from my personal history here with the chamber ourselves. Our manager Becky, she's done a great job of always having meetings on Zoom, so that we're always kind of talking about what we're doing from a meeting perspective. But another thing that she created was a thing that we would share within our team about sharing the top 3 things that we're going to work on that day or that week, and it's a good way to kind of just bring everybody together, talk about what they're doing, and then also sharing this to say, like, this is what I'm going to be working on. So it's not in a sense of micromanaging, but it's just like a conversation like you would have in the office. This is what I'm going to work on today. What are you working on, kind of thing, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, knowing where you are every day makes a real difference, and what's important. And I see a question coming up.
Yeah, it says from Becky, I think having to check in on a Monday is great, but it's really important to check in on Friday and take a breather together too.
Yeah, and I think the first almost, even 10 minutes now, the way we are, the first 10 minutes of a regular meeting is just how you doing, like what's going on, what's happening. And we're talking about that sense of connection, so that has to be social as well. So I think that's there. And one thing that I found over time that leaders may be a bit challenged on is actually the feeling side. So assessing how people are actually feeling. There's always been a belief that as you become a leader and a more senior leader, that you're not supposed to show vulnerability. And I think that's probably the other way around, that if you let people know that you have feelings too, then I think that makes it easier to be accessible and to be open. I think the challenge in psychology is always a big issue for me in terms of how this is going to impact people. I think there's no question we have a health impact, we have an economic impact. I do believe the psychological impact of this will probably be the largest lasting effect that we have. So what I'm looking at is, I think one of the most important things for leaders to do is actually have that discussion and probably one-on-one with different people, but just checking in to see how are they feeling, how are you doing, and what's it like. I do believe that in group sessions, people will not raise their hand and say they're struggling. But I think there are a lot of people struggling right now. And I think it's really a leader's responsibility to be looking out for that and trying to find ways to understand what is going on. So I think that makes a big difference. So moving forward, we want to talk,
Sorry to cut you off. Just one. There was a couple of points here in the chat that I just bring up. Prior to being laid off, an individual had mentioned that there was a lack of communication, especially from leadership, which was very hard mentally. So they mentioned communication is key, which is, I think, is a great point. And then Kevin mentioned within our internal team, we have a Friday social every week, 30 minutes. Only rule is don't talk about Netflix episodes other than others may not have seen. Each person gets time to talk about their week, which is pretty cool. Lois, I've told my staff that I'm actively researching how to improve working remotely as a team, and that I'll throw things into the mix for us to try and see if it works for us. I'm also encouraging them to watch webinars that interest them and tell us about it, and ask in general how they are and how they can make things better, which is great. Mary Jane mentioned, I think it's also important to just check in as one person to another, not just check in about work stuff and let people know you're there to be supportive. And Vanessa mentioned lots of people are struggling. People need to have a forum to share their suggestions. So lots of great comments on that.
That's excellent. So, and it's, again, I find it interesting, most of it does revolve around feelings. And I know in the past, when I was running the other two businesses, I would say that feelings were not something that I put front and center. I was very driven in terms of results and outcomes and what was going to happen. I wouldn't suggest that depression is the best way for people to learn, but I know for me, I wouldn't trade the experience of what I took from it, and a much sharper understanding of feelings and how different situations affect people. And I'm always very open about where I am. And I think what that's done is enabled people on my team to be very open about where they are. And I just find we have way better conversations. We trust each other more. We understand where each other is and what's going on. And I think that makes us a lot more human. So I think, what people have been saying is incredibly positive to see that there's actually movements about let's just be humans and talk to each other like we are and find out where we're at and what's going on, even if it's Netflix. So that was great. So moving on, where we are right now is also different. If we were having this session 6 months ago, it would have been a different conversation. Everything that we're experiencing right now is basically in the unknown. That's the challenge most people are facing, is that it's very uncertain as to where we're going. Things are very ambiguous. We don't quite know what's going to happen. And that puts a lot of fear into people as to where will they be, where will the business be. So that health impact is really, like I said, coming through is probably a bigger potential psychological impact. So the work we put into connecting with each other, I think, is probably going to pay off more than anything else that we do. So going further, what we're looking at is adapting. And I know I'm pestering you with questions, but just interested in how people are experiencing this. So what have been the challenges you faced going forward? We've talked about what's been positive, how you've found things from leaders, but on your own side, and feel free to use the chat as well or raise your hand. What has been the toughest aspects of adapting to where you are? IT. So yeah, that's a big issue for companies that we've had to go remote, and it's really opened up how many companies were not ready in terms of technology for working by web. So that's been a big piece. Anything else that people have found tough? Predicting the future. Yeah. Predicting the future is a really challenging one. I did in the past do a lot of work with leadership during crisis, and that is something that when we don't know the future, we still have to talk about it. And it's trying to find out what values are going to hold us together, what's that common purpose we're working towards, and that does help. A lot of distractions, people are saying. So that's one of the positive things about working from home is you've got the flexibility. On the other side, you've got distractions. I've just found out how much my neighbors annoy me. They love working on their cars when I'm having video calls. So didn't know that. Now I do. So you can get really distracted with other things. Lack of social connection is huge. Just those chance conversations you have at work make a huge difference. Having your spouse at home too, and only one office. I think, Chris, you can talk to that one probably more than anybody else.
Yeah. So yeah, just to share with everybody, as I'm sure my wife will be pleased about, we have a beautiful home office on our main level that she had first pick of, and I was sent to the basement. So the background of the chamber is to hide the lovely attire that I have in my basement.
So I've heard from a lot of people that working at home with the entire family there is challenging, particularly when you've got children that are being homeschooled, or you've got young kids and trying to keep them interested and engaged in what they're working on. So that's great. There's a lot going on. So moving forward, what we're looking at is the biggest thing most people find is that lack of connection with others and missing the casual human connections we have with people and the sense of belonging that we get when we work face-to-face with people. So what are some things that we can do that will set us up for success? So there's 5 things I wanted to look at for the employee, and then also look at from the other side, from the employer's side. For the employee, which is on the next page, we're looking at is psychological well-being, like we said, is the biggest challenge. So if we go to the next page, we'll get best practices. Here we go. So being at home allows us to be flexible and adaptable, and that can also fall apart into not actually having something to work within. There's no structure. So a lot of the things that really help people work in a very positive way from home revolve around having some type of structure. So having a routine, because it is so easy to get distracted and lose continuity. So it's setting times for work and how to set up your workflow and go to work as if you're actually going to the office makes a big difference. Putting anchors in place, and that I think more than anything else is both physical and mental. So having exercise, having fitness, having time outside, having things that help you keep your headspace in the right place in terms of meditation, or again, getting outside. For a lot of people, it's going to having the right childcare arrangements so you can focus on work. Someone mentioned before, dedicated workspace makes a huge difference. So having a place that's actually for work, because if not, I find a lot of times you'll see work and you'll just sit down and do work. So a lot of times what can happen is people get into working way longer hours than they used to in the office. And one of the comments I saw, which was great, is that gratitude turns into servitude. That we're really grateful to our employer for allowing us the flexibility of working remotely, and to the extent that we feel we have to almost overdo it. So we work way more hours than we used to. Having outlets for social interactions. So yeah, we've got to be able to talk to people and see people and make those connections. And we have to change our perspective a bit, because it's really important when we're working remotely to speak up and let people know where we are and what's going on. And it is not a weakness to ask for help. It's very much a strength to be able to say, I need this here, or I'm struggling with this, I'm having a challenge here. So if we don't speak up, people won't know, and that's really critical to find. So if we look at the other side for the employer, what it comes down to is really making sure the culture is there. So putting a lot of time and effort into that connection piece, the communication piece, to make sure that people are together, whether they're remote or whether they're on site. Providing employees with the technology. So someone had mentioned IT. A lot of times we'll look at moving people to offsite or remote working arrangements, but we don't actually make sure that the technology is there. I've heard that one of the biggest issues people are facing right now is cyber security, because people are using home computers, possibly they're switching back and forth between possibly a work laptop and home. So there's definitely security issues. So with the right time, that would be something we really need to watch, is that both the hardware, the software, and those connections are all provided for people. Effective decision making. So again, for the employer, we've got to include people from home. We can't forget that they're in the company. And again, that can happen when you don't see people. It makes a big difference. Again, clear purpose. And someone said before, it's that uncertainty about the future. I can't predict the future, but we can be certain about what we're working on. What's the purpose of what we're doing? What are the goals we're working towards? And talking about what those challenges are and being able to move forward with them. And then again, just thinking through communication. Communication is more important, I think, probably than anything. And how we communicate will actually, I think, more than anything else, say whether that environment's going to be thriving or not. So that's what we want to really look at. So what do we do going forward to make sure we have a thriving workforce arrangement? Biggest thing is to measure it. I'm sorry, I'm an analyst. So if you can't measure it, it's really hard to do something with it. I love numbers. So what we're looking at is, how do you measure those 5 aspects that we talked about? How do we make sure they're actually working? When we're just talking about things, the credibility sometimes is not there. When we can actually measure it and see, oh, okay, there's been a 20% change here, that makes a big difference. Understanding the stress impact and what supports are needed. So again, what's happening with people and how is it affecting them, and making sure that we provide the supports as a business that people have what they need. Psychological safety, so ensuring that, again, people are connected and they're able to contribute and to raise their hand and to talk. We want to look at resilience, like how are people doing, like how is this affecting them? This will be different, but still there when we're not in this type of situation overall. But the biggest thing, I think, more than anything else, is to ask. If you want to know how something is going, you ask. As soon as you ask the question, people will answer and then do something about it. So I want to be a little bit shameless here and talk a little bit about what we've been working on. I'd mentioned that when I came out of the other 2 companies, we founded a project called the Mindset Project, which looked at how entrepreneurs deal with mental health and with decision making. And that led us into working environment. So never thought we'd go down this road, but started a tech company 2 years ago and developed an analytic that looks at working environment. What I found, and the whole belief I have, is that if we can understand the working environment, then we can actively shape that so that it's a positive working environment. So we've got healthy people, healthy companies, and healthy growth. And a lot of this comes down to simply looking at how do we understand the impact of working environment on the way people actually contribute and work together. Harvard did like a seminal study in my mind about 10 years ago that showed that no matter what the strategy is, no matter what the product is, what makes the most difference, 85% of the difference in terms of whether we're going to succeed or not, is how we work together. And we focus too much on individual performance and not enough in terms of how do we actually work together and what's that working environment like. So we developed an analytic called Work Insights, collective functional performance. At the same time, we developed a second one, which is kind of relevant right now, which is remote working environment. So talk just a little bit about that to let people know how you do that. So if you go to the next page, I'll just run through really quickly what that looks like. So again, what we're looking at is how do we measure the remote working environment. And what we're talking about again is that people clearly enjoy working remotely. Those that do want to stay that way, and those that are not would like to have a look at it. And there's been a real growth in remote working, so we want to make sure we do it the right way. So the next page just gives a background in terms of what that looks like. And then we look at, okay, what's the problem? So then we go to what's challenging in terms of how do we make sure we do things right and that we don't run into the problems of what challenges remote working environment? So how do we shape it? So more than anything, we have to have that face-to-face supervision. We have to have information, and we have to be connected. So how do we measure that there's a good access to information and that there's not that feeling of social isolation? So what we looked at then is the solution. And so when we're looking at the challenges of working from home, it's about data. And again, I come from a place of numbers. So first thing we look at doing is actually benchmarking the working environment for remote workers and unlocking that data that you wouldn't normally have had before about how they feel and what is working or not working for them. We provide the data and interpret it in terms of what does that look like for you as a business and for your employees, and then what would you do going forward in terms of applying that into the workplace and how would that go. So if you go to the next page, what it looks at is we start with a session where we actually understand first and foremost what you're doing as an organization or as a business. The survey takes about 15 minutes and everyone answers it throughout the organization. So every single employee, it's confidential, so no one knows who says what. We provide a report with all the perspectives and insights. Everything is aggregated, so it's a great way to understand what's going on, put your finger on the pulse of where people are. If people are hesitant to raise their hand and say that they're facing challenges here or struggles there, this is a way for that to come through. And then we simply download that information in a capstone session in terms of this is where things are, this is what it looks like, and this is how we move forward. And you can reassess that on a monthly basis. There's a 5-minute survey we do that just shows how things are moving. So you can keep your finger on what's happening as we go through. If you go to the next page, there's just a quick comment in terms of what data. And again, the big 5 things we look at is that connection there. So do people feel that they're a part of the organization and have relationships with others? Is the communication working? Are people getting access that they need to information and to people that they need to be able to talk to? Is there inclusion? Is the culture actually bringing people in who are working remotely, making them feel part of that organization? Is there a sense of meaningful contribution? Do I know what I'm doing is actually making a difference? And then coordination. Does everything make sense? Does it all come together? And these are the areas that we measure. And what that looks like is on the next page, which is a quick data show. And we compare both on-site and remote employees. We can show over a series of different aspects what's going on. We give you a good look at how things are affecting people. We look at the psychological safety. We look at stress. We can actually pinpoint what is stressing people and what would help. And also the resilience factor in terms of where you are and what are the most important things that people want to take away. Sorry, I find this fun, but what's really fun for us is on the next page is that we can do that over time. So we can actually show how things change. So you can see that the impact of what actions you've taken are having on the way people are working remotely and how that feels for people. And you can also make adjustments in real time as you move forward. So going forward, the benefits of actually measuring the working environment is it really does help change behaviors. So leaders particularly can find this a great way to understand what they need to do. It's a really measurable, tangible framework so we can see it and understand clearly what people are experiencing. There's a meaningful impact because we're getting the true voice of what people are experiencing and how it's affecting them. Now I can make decisions that are informed. We have the data we need to understand exactly what's happening and why. And there's this inherent motivation that if everyone's being able to put their hand up and say how they're doing, it makes a huge difference. So that's what we're looking at there. So that's something we've been working on. And I want to leave it at that. If people are interested, they're more than open to touch base with us. What's next is another question for you. My last question for you is in terms of the working remote experience, what are the biggest insights you've had and what would you like to see stay in place after we do come back to working together in some form or another? And we're probably looking at in the next 2 months that we'll be working in some type of next normal. So from this remote working experience, what are the things that you'd like to see stay in place? And again, you can use chat or raise your hand, whichever one is best.
So while we wait for someone to raise a hand or ask a question, oh, here come a few. Can you see them on the chat there, Mike?
I can. So
Yeah.
being open is a big issue. Permission, excuse to ask about people. I love that comment. So yeah, it does. Like we always feel like we can't actually ask how people are doing, and this environment right now has yeah, oddly enough, it's almost like we've got permission to do it. I think that's a great comment. That going forward, if we actually know that it's quite acceptable and really useful to ask people how it's doing, how they're doing, and what's going on, I think that's great.
There was one comment too by Paul about the ability to provide flexible work environment, and that still meets production goals. Yeah.
And like we said, the studies have all shown, research has all shown that productivity actually goes up, and that makes a big difference. So for employers looking at bringing in remote working environments, the biggest thing I think that that employers here will find is that this really takes away the challenge for finding talent, because we don't necessarily have to find talent who's going to be working in our office. So, and we can also attract people who may not want to come into an office every day, but would like to work out of Lunenburg maybe, or some other area. And this gives us the option of doing that. What the studies have shown is that remote work is something that most employees would like, if they had the opportunity, but there's actually a mix of about 75-25. That 75% of the time we'd like to work on our own remotely. 25% of the time we'd like to be on site, being able to connect with people. So usually there's a good balance of being able to work remotely, but also having that connection within the office to be able to see people and have those interactions that we just wouldn't have if we were focused solely at home. And the other surprise that I found, at least a surprise for me, was that when people want to get away from their home, if they're working remotely, where do they go? So most people think coffee shops and shared working arrangements. But the most common people, like 60% of people who come out of their home from working remotely, go to the office. So I found that really funny, that of all the places you go after you finally get a remote working arrangement, is you go to the office to get away from home. So there is that balance of where you want to be. So I think without a doubt, by the sound of things, people are adapting and working through this. Like I said, I think we're finding that there's a great sense of new pace, that it's more relaxed, we have less stress. I absolutely love that comment that, yeah, we've got permission to actually ask how people are doing and how it's going for them. And I think that's something that's such a strength, and we should continue that. And there's no question that we're going to be looking at how do we actually incorporate remote work into our future, and understanding how those 5 pieces interplay, and understanding how to set people up for success, and then keeping in touch with them and understanding what the experience is like. That's what's going to make the biggest difference. And I'm going to stop there. And what's on the next page is just a comment in terms of where we are going. And I think we can be a lot happier and with more money. Those are 2 things that always are nice to go together. And we can learn a lot, both as leaders and employees, for the way things are going right now. And I think we can make a lot better decisions going forward. I know from personal experience, as I mentioned 8 weeks ago, I would have said that we would never go to remote work, and we'll always have an office situation. What I can say is we're not going to have an office situation going forward. I found that this arrangement has worked really well. I think it gives everyone a chance to be at their best. And now it's becoming like these conversations we've had that, yeah, some days are just not great days, so don't work that day. You can do it another day. Like, the outcome is X. It doesn't have to be done in a certain way. And I think as leaders, it's a great learning experience in terms of getting out of the weeds of the process and looking at the outcome and letting people find their best way of getting there. So I think this is something that will make a hugely positive difference if the right supports are in place. Any final comments from people or questions at all?
Just waiting to see if any pop up. I guess one question. Oh, here comes one. Oh, just a comment for you, Mike. Great session, very interesting, which is nice. One question I did have is, you know, from a chamber point of view, we're very busy. We're going into meetings, in and out of meetings, but a lot of our meetings, it'll foster creation of other ideas. And one question we have from that is, how can we still have like water cooler type discussions with the team to help create ideas when you work remotely?
So in terms of building a software, there's just so much collaboration and interaction that's needed. And you just sometimes need a whiteboard to draw and doodle on to show what you're thinking. So we have had, I would say, like our best meetings in terms of those morning tactical meetings about what's going to happen. The challenge we found is that each of us are trying to point to a board as to what we meant. So we actually last week we had a 3-hour team session, which when I first thought about, God, 3 hours on video, that's going to be awful. It was like the shortest 3 hours we ever had. It was incredibly interactive and collaborative, and we were able to work through a big piece. I do feel that that 1 or 2 days a week in the office is a great time to be able to have that creative, interactive time, and that's probably where it should be focused. Like I think coming into the office a day or two a week is really positive, both for the social side, but also for the collaborative side in terms of working that way, in terms of sharing what you're working on and how to get ideas from people. But I think you can, I don't think you can do tactical meetings and creative meetings together. So if you're having a regular weekly meeting, I think you've got to separate it up. So
Right.
what we did is just set that time aside and did it. And luckily, the people on the team are, my team are way technologically advanced than I am. So they're able to share things on screen and we can make comments about it and you can see it. But I do believe you can collaborate remotely. It just comes down to setting up the time and space and the right atmosphere to do it. So I do think to like have one big thing you're working on. If you're trying to work on 2 or 3 kind of big topics, you almost feel rushed to get through them all and you don't really pay attention like you should. So the session we had, we were really focused on one big issue and it gave us a chance to hash it out, talk about it. Everyone was interacting. I do think it's easier for smaller teams to have that type of interaction. So if you've got creative projects, it's probably better to break it into smaller teams for specific areas and let them have those types of meetings.
Great. Oh, that's good advice. I have a question here from Paul. How do you ensure remote employees will remain engaged, motivated, and on schedule?
So I go back to the big 5. So to be engaged, you have to know it's the same as working on site. You know, are you making a contribution? Can you see how what you do actually flows through to what the business is doing and to the outcomes that the business is trying to achieve? So can you see your part showing up in what's happening? And are you recognized for that? And do you see how what you do is making a difference and you're actually hearing about the difference you're making? The other part is that social connection with both the team and the managers has to be there. So you feel like you're part of it. So, and there has to be a vision that you can connect with. So where is this business going? Whether I'm on site or working remotely, I have to be able to connect to the vision. Like, do I fit here? Is this something that's really going to make a difference? Am I going to find meaning in what I'm going to do? So I think on the engagement side, it's as much the same for working on site as off site, just with more emphasis probably on that communication and connection that do people feel they're included. And I think a big thing working remotely too, if we take away the current landscape, is that if there's major projects, they're not just given to whoever I can see in front of me, that you actually think through, okay, who should be on this project? So if they're working remotely or in the office, they're included in that. So that comes down to the leader being very clear about including everyone in terms of those project decisions, who's on the project committee, those types of things, but also promotions, who gets promoted as well, because that can be a challenge.
Great. Okay, Michael, so we're almost out of time, so I'll just kind of wrap it up here. So first and foremost, thank you again to you, Michael, for joining us today. It was really great, a lot of good information. I also wanted to say a big thank you to all of those who attended today and asking a lot of questions. It was quite interactive, which was nice. You can tell everyone was really engaged. We're hosting more webinars every week with experts in mental health, professional services, sales, banking, and more. So just head to halifaxchamber.com/events for a full lineup. We also recorded this webinar and it will be available to all attendees shortly on our YouTube channel. And thanks again, and we hope to see everyone at our next one.
Thank you.
Great.